This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, the federal cabinet retreat gets underway in Montreal with the cost of living crisis and the looming U.S. presidential election high on the agenda. Also tonight, celebration and apprehension in India as a Hindu temple is set to open on the site of a former mosque.
Every security measures have been taken, from the CCTV camera, from artificial intelligence technique.
And as international soccer deals with more racism scandals, activists say drastic measures are the only way forward.
We've been an advocate of walking off the field of play from the players, or else we're just going to be going round in circles with the same conversation time and time again.
That's later, but first. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his ministers are kicking off a Liberal cabinet retreat in Montreal today. They'll hear from experts on the government's top priorities, including housing affordability and the rising cost of living, all while the clock is ticking on a federal election and the opposition continues to make inroads in the polls. Tom Perry is in Montreal covering the retreat. So, Tom, what's on the agenda?
Well, there are three big topics, really. Housing, the middle class, so cost of living, inflation, that kind of thing, and Canada-U.S. relations. So housing, obviously a huge issue right now. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has just been clobbering the Liberals on rising rents, on home prices, on housing shortages. So Cabinet will be hearing from experts looking for ways to get more homes built faster. You could see immigration coming into play on that issue as well. We've seen the government move to, try to rein in the number of foreign students coming to Canada. It was a big topic the last time Cabinet held a retreat last summer in Charlottetown. I think you could expect to hear more about that at this meeting. Cabinet will also be hearing from economists on those cost of living issues, another topic where the Conservatives have just been hammering the Liberals. Inflation, of course, is down, but Canadians are still feeling the pinch, and the Liberals know that this is a problem for them. Now, the other big topic here in Montreal, Canada-U.S. relations, and more specifically, what would it mean for Canada if voters in the U.S. put Donald Trump back in the White House? Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kristen Hillman, she'll be speaking to Cabinet. Ministers will be hearing from some policy experts. And this issue, this possibility, is a major concern for the government. Justin Trudeau has said it wasn't easy for Canada the first time Trump was in office. It won't be easy if there's a second term. But that's really a bit of an understatement. There is just genuine concern that Trump, the sequel, could be far worse for Canada, and the government is trying to plan as best as it can for that possibility.
And of course, also in everyone's minds will be an election coming down the track, and there are a lot of challenges for the Liberals, right? Can you take us through some of those?
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, if you believe the polls, the Liberals are in deep, deep trouble. As I say, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, they've been having a field day on issues like housing and on inflation, on crime, and they've been very successful in pinning the blame for these and really any problems on the Liberals. So a lot of voters look like they're just tired of the Liberals, like they're tired of Justin Trudeau. The government has got a deal with the NDP to hold off an election until 2025, but you never know. And the Liberals need to come up with some new ideas, a new story, if you will, to tell voters to try to win them back. So this meeting is a part of that, and we'll see what comes of it.
Okay, Tom, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The CBC's Tom Perry in Montreal. While healthcare may not be front and center at this retreat, it is an issue weighing heavily on the minds of many. You've heard the stories. Long wait times, a flood of patients, and just not enough doctors to see them, all at a time when Canada's population is booming. JP Tasker breaks down the data and tells us why some fear the shortage may only get worse.
That's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 of us will not have a family doctor.
Marilyn Gifford is fed up with the chronic family doctor shortage in southwestern Ontario. The senior citizen from Sarnia has been out pounding the pavement for the last year. She wears an apron that carries a message.
And this old lady here needs at least 1,000 signatures. It says here, your family's life may depend upon it.
It's part of a grassroots effort to convince the provincial government to add medical residency positions to train many more homegrown doctors.
I went out one-on-one and I talked to over 2,900 people myself. And the stories are horrible. There is no primary care available to the average person now.
A CBC News analysis of medical school data shows the number of residents has been stagnant for the last 10 years. Nationwide, there's only 167 more people training to practice medicine than there were a decade ago. Meanwhile, the federal government has ramped up immigration. Canada's population has surged by about 5 million people in the same 10-year period.
The numbers are staggering when you think about how many we need and how big the gap is.
Dr. Kathleen Ross is the president of the Canadian Medical Association and a family doctor in Coquitlam, BC. She's concerned about data that shows interest in family medicine has nosedived. Only 30% of new medical residents choose to work in that field, down from nearly 38% in 2014, according to medical school records.
I've worked as a family doctor for 30 years, and I have seen the rise in complexity, the rise in administrative burden.
If things don't change, Ross says an already dire situation will get worse. More than 6.5 million Canadians are without regular access to primary care right now. One roadblock is the tangle of red tape that makes it difficult for people trained abroad to practice medicine here in Canada. The country's employment minister, Randy Boissonneau, says that sort of protectionism must end, but he was short on specifics.
You can put artificial barriers to people accessing the labor market. We can't afford that anymore.
Back in Sarnia, Gifford won't give up the fight until her community gets the care it needs.
We are in crisis mode here. There's no way we're going to catch up. We're falling behind.
What isn't falling? Emergency room visits. They spiked to 15 million last year, according to the latest data. That's up more than 1 million from the year before. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is dropping out of the race for the White House. DeSantis was once thought to have the best chance of defeating former President Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, but his fortunes quickly changed and he came in a distant second in last week's Iowa caucus. Trump and Nikki Haley are campaigning in New Hampshire this weekend. That state holds its Republican primary vote on Tuesday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doubling down on his rejection of a two-state solution. Despite pressure from the U.S. and the UN, Netanyahu said again today Palestinian sovereignty would compromise Israel's national security. All this as frustration mounts within Israel, where protesters are calling for change. Katie Simpson reports.
In the streets of Tel Aviv, by the thousands, they chanted shame, holding signs demanding Israel's prime minister step down, denouncing his handling of this crisis. The government that abandoned us on October 7th continues to abandon us every day since, says the sister of a 22-year-old Israeli soldier who was killed in fighting near the Gaza border. But there are no signs there will be change in the immediate future. We are continuing the war on all fronts and in all sectors, said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a taped video statement released today. He's also rejecting calls to support a two-state solution, a demand U.S. President Joe Biden pushed for during a phone call this weekend. I told President Biden, he said, I will not compromise on full Israeli security control of all territory west of the Jordan River, repeating similar comments he made earlier on social media, which concerned UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
The denial of the right to statehood for the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security.
Since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, which killed 1,200 people, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 25,000 people have been killed there. Guterres called it, quote, heartbreaking and utterly unacceptable. Israel's bombing in Gaza continues. Where is safety, says this displaced mother seeking shelter in Rafah. I came from Jabalia. I was hit by an airstrike, she says. I went to Khan Yunis. I was hit by an airstrike. When I go to bring food to cook for my children, I'm hit. Where is safety, she asks. Instability is spreading through the region. Iran is vowing retaliation after 5 senior intelligence officials were killed in an airstrike in Syria. It blames Israel. While Iranian-backed militias launched a new attack on U.S. soldiers stationed at an Iraqi airbase, injuring at least 2 there. All of it appearing to be an expansion of this conflict. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Almost as soon as Israel's operation in Gaza began, talks started about the day after. In other words, the future of Gaza and the Palestinian territories. While the U.S. and Israel's leaders publicly spar over their differing visions, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank tell freelance reporter Rebecca Collard they'll decide their own political future.
In a cafe in Ramallah, Saif Akil tells me he doesn't want to talk about the day after.
I'd like to address this issue now while we have ongoing war. We're complicit actually with the Israeli narrative and the international narrative.
Akil is the deputy leader of the youth wing of Fatah, Hamas's main rival. At 30 years old, he has never had the chance to vote. Hamas won the last parliamentary elections in 2006. In response, Israel withheld tax transfers. The U.S. and the EU cut aid to the Palestinian Authority and put pressure on Fatah and its leader, Mahmoud Abbas, to form a new government without Hamas. But Akil says that sort of pressure will no longer be tolerated here.
The only way to accept someone is through a democracy, an honest democracy, and we don't care if the international community accepted the results of this democracy.
International aid was reinstated after Abbas formed a government without Hamas, and Palestinian elections have since been postponed. Abbas is now 15 years over his original 4-year mandate as president, with few questions asked about his legitimacy outside the Palestinian territories. Mustafa Barghouti is a Palestinian politician who came second to Abbas in the last presidential elections.
The Palestinian public will never accept somebody who will be imposed on them. And I know that what Israel wants is not a real Palestinian Authority, but they want a bunch of collaborators who could work under their occupation and serve the Israeli interest. And that is
in the Student Council office at the Birzeit University near Ramallah, Saleh Hassan shows me the aftermath of a raid by Israeli soldiers.
And they arrested 8 students from here.
Hassan is a computer science student and part of the Hamas-affiliated Islamic bloc, which won student elections here in May. Hassan points to a poster of a young man he says was arrested not by Israel, but by Palestinian security forces.
Yes, this is the honorary president of the Student Council. He's a prisoner.
And he's in prison now?
He's in prison in the Palestinian Authority, like a year now in prison.
At the university, the Palestinian public's disdain for the Palestinian Authority and its leadership is clear. Outside, Dana, who did not want to give her last name, fearing repercussions, sits on a bench holding a kitten. No one sane would side with our leaders right now, she tells me. We want them to quit and to be replaced by a form of resistance. She says she supports Hamas. Back at the Student Council office, Hassan says Palestinians have given up on the peace process, and any idea international support would protect them or bring about a Palestinian state. The last months, he says, have shown Palestinians they are on their own.
These Palestinians are able to resist themselves. They do not have to wait for the aids of people around them. They could pick up their own weapons. They could fight for their country. We do not have to wait for the liberation from outside.
Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
In northern India, there is a festive atmosphere in the city of Ayodhya. Thousands of devoted Hindus have made the pilgrimage to the city, where on Monday a grand temple to the deity Ram will be consecrated. Because of its size and religious significance, the temple has been called the Hindu Vatican. For Indian Muslims, the temple opening evokes painful memories. It was once the site of a 16th century mosque, which Hindus believe was built on top of Lord Ram's birthplace. In 1992, a Hindu nationalist mob razed the structure with hammers, axes, and ropes. Nationwide riots followed. 2,000 people died. Mohammed Shahid's father and uncle were among them.
My father was chased down by a mob. They hit him in the belly with a broken bottle before pouring kerosene on him and burning him alive. They did it to my uncle, too.
In 2019, India's Supreme Court ruled the site belongs to Hindus, granting a significant victory to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his party, the BJP, which have been pushing for the temple for decades. For more on this, I spoke to the CBC's South Asia correspondent, Salima Shivji. So, Salima, you're in the holy city of Ayodhya ahead of tomorrow's ceremony. What's it like?
Well, it's a small city and it is packed with thousands of pilgrims decked out in saffron orange, the color, of course, associated with Hinduism, waving their saffron flags with the image of Lord Ram on them, one of the most revered gods in Hinduism. There really are crowds of people congregating in large tent cities. They're all here to witness the long-awaited Ram Temple, India's largest Hindu place of worship, be inaugurated. So security is tight, with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi set to consecrate the temple, which is only half finished. And it's a huge deal, really billed as a national celebration. Schools are closed in the state, the stock market in India will pause, and VIPs will fly into this small town that's in the grips of religious fervor. There's lots of songs and chants heard everywhere, constantly, and lots of praise for Modi, seen by many as instrumental in pushing for this temple. This is really a major victory for Narendra Modi's Hindu Nationalist Party, the BJP, fulfilling a long-standing promise of returning this contested land to the Hindus. And now it's a grand, extravagant temple complex, and all signs of the old mosque completely erased.
This is undoubtedly a moment of celebration for India's majority Hindus, but what's the significance of today for India's 200 million Muslims, given the history of this site?
Let's talk about here in this community, which has been divided for decades as there's been a contestation over the land. There's a sense of resignation in Ayodhya's Muslim community. You know, they've accepted that the temple is here to stay, and many here say they want to keep their heads down, stay quiet over the next few days, and they do want to live peacefully with their Hindu neighbors. Still, a lot of the Muslims see the Supreme Court decision that sided with the Hindu community and allowed the temple to be built on this contested land as unfair and unconstitutional. Now, that same decision also specified that a replacement mosque be built in a prominent location, and that's not happened. The plot of land reserved for a new mosque here in Ayodhya is 25 kilometers away from the city center, and it's barren. There's been no movement on the project. And with all the celebrations over the Ram Temple, some members of the Muslim community here told me that they're feeling uneasy. There are fears that violence could erupt this week once all the dignitaries have left town.
Now, construction on the Ram Temple isn't actually done, and it won't be for months. So why is the inauguration happening now?
Well, this is very much about the fact that India will go to the polls in just a few months. Experts say, this is an unofficial start to the campaign for Narendra Modi, keen to talk up the temple to really boost his profile. And you can see that on the ground here. There are billboards every few meters showing the Prime Minister with his hands in prayer in front of images of the Ram Temple. Opposition officials in the country have accused Modi of crafting this ceremony as an election gimmick. They're calling it a stunt to play for votes among the ruling party's Hindu base. But the narrative around this temple works. The BJP, experts tell me, is really telling voters, we're the party for you, we will protect the Hindu majority. And Modi, in this case, is able to position himself as the leader, who got this done, working to change India's secular ideals and foster a more Hindu nation.
So how much of an impact could the opening of this temple have on the election?
Well, Modi is already in great shape ahead of the election. He's very popular, and many think it's likely he'll win a third term. But this temple is also about cementing his legacy as a strong leader who delivers what his base yearns for. And you can really feel Modi's popularity on the ground among the Hindu devotees who've come here from far and wide. Some have come from across India, some have come from abroad. I was at the local bus station here where volunteers had gathered to dole out food to other Hindu pilgrims, and almost everyone I spoke with said it's thanks to Modi that the Ram Temple has been built. Two people compared him to a Hindu god. And one man told me he didn't vote for Modi way back in 2014, but now that the Prime Minister has made Hindus proud, he said, he'll never vote for anybody else.
Okay, thanks so much, Salima.
Thank you.
CBC's South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji in Ayodhya, India. It's been a while since kids in this country took peanuts into schools, but it looks like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich may be back on the menu, at least at one Yukon school. It has lifted its long-standing ban on peanuts and tree nuts. That's really worrying for some parents of kids with allergies, but the school claims there are better ways to protect kids. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains.
At a White Horse Elementary School's cafeteria, kids reconnect after the holidays. Some of them eating something they've never been able to pack in their lunch boxes before, Nuts and peanuts are now allowed for students in grade 3 and up. The initiative, says Principal Marie-Hélène Gagné, came from the parents. The school invited them for a big meeting.
We basically all agreed that nuts and peanuts were nutritious and they were part of our healthy eating habits. Parents were very, very aware of the research, and they were also very aware of the risks.
For many years, banning things like nuts and peanut butter from schools was considered the gold standard in preventing severe allergic reactions in students. But a major 2021 study led by researchers at McMaster University found that there just isn't enough evidence that bans even work.
What we found is that there wasn't great literature to support the practice.
Allergist and clinical immunologist Dr. Susan Wasserman led the study, and she cautions the findings come with major caveats.
If you are going to eliminate food restriction as just one of the things that may work, that everything else has to be in place, meaning that the staff and whoever looks after children do have to be aware of who the food allergic children are.
Plus, of course, rigorous hand washing and cleaning of surfaces. But those best practices may not be possible at all school. Jennifer Gerds, executive director of advocacy organization Food Allergy Canada, says schools are advised to have many policies in place, not just bans. But those recommendations have to contend with reality. Some schools are so strapped for staff that older kids supervise younger kids' lunches.
When it comes to removing restrictions or removing bans, I think that a lot of schools will be very hesitant to consider that because, you know, it does have a lot of implications.
Implications keenly felt by families with children with food allergies like Morgan Klaczewski and Job Gauniam in Winnipeg. Their son Simon, now 9, almost died when he was 18 months old. His throat started closing after he had a single cashew. Sending Simon to school leaves his parents racked with anxiety, something they say would be even worse if more schools were to scrap food bans.
Why reverse it? Like, what if the argument is that it is giving people a false sense of security? I want to assure everybody that as a parent of a child who can die from ingesting something, I never have a sense of security, ever. Never.
As for Whitehorse School, they have additional protocols in place. Nut restrictions still apply to students in the youngest grades, and EpiPens are well stocked at the office. The school's administration say they'll monitor the situation and be open to feedback from parents and staff. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
The head of international soccer's governing body says teams should forfeit their games if fans engage in racist behavior against players. The proposal from FIFA's president comes after several recent incidents, including one this weekend in Italy, which saw AC Milan's game briefly suspended. Philip Lishanok has the details.
Has left his goal. During the game against Udine, Italy on Saturday, AC Milan's goalkeeper Mike Maignan walked off the pitch after the hometown crowd began making monkey sounds. His teammates followed him in protest. Maignan says fans should face consequences.
This thing of racism cannot be allowed to reach this level. Something must be done to change things.
During a match in Sheffield, England, Coventry midfielder Casey Palmer stopped play when a fan in the stands made monkey gestures towards him. Coventry City head coach Mark Robbins says this behavior must have consequences.
I'm hoping that, they've got a clear picture of what's gone on and they deal with them properly.
Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, the World Soccer Federation, says what happened at both games is unacceptable and says teams whose fans have committed racist acts must be punished. Their team could face automatic forfeit of the game, leagues should ban fans, and police should lay criminal charges. Troy Townsend is a former British footballer and head of Kick It Out, which aims to stop racism in sport. He says black players have been putting up with racist chants for years, and authorities need to send a message or some will refuse to play.
We've been, as an organisation, an advocate of walking off the field of play from the players, or else we're just going to be going round in circles with the same conversation time and time again.
Piara Pawar is head of Fair Network, an organisation that seeks to end discrimination in European football. He says they've documented hundreds of such incidents every season, despite FIFA rules.
The match will be forfeited in favour of the team who suffered the racism, right? Because those are the rules already in place.
But he says more organizations need to take action. And Puar says teams need to work to change their fan culture and not tolerate racism on or off the pitch. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Bob Diemert was a man who always had his head in the clouds. He was a farm kid from rural Manitoba with only a high school education, but he became known internationally as an aviation visionary. Diemert died recently. Karen Pauls looks back at his life and legacy.
Here on the edge of Carman, Manitoba, the only designer and builder of fighter aircraft in Canada is hard at work on his latest project.
In 1988, the National Film Board did a documentary on Bob Diemert.
All the wings come into this section right here. I was just getting around to drawing that.
A self-taught engineer, his hobby was restoring vintage warplanes. When the producers of the war film, The Battle of Britain, heard Diemert restored a Hawker Hurricane aircraft, they reached out to him. Diane Sauvelet is Diemert's oldest daughter.
Of course, he said, my plane's not going there without me, and I'm the only one who's flying my plane.
Diemert flew it across the ocean and became one of the stunt pilots in the movie. He went on to explore jungles in the South Pacific, convincing the Canadian military to send a Hercules aircraft to help him collect and bring back parts from downed Japanese warplanes.
He cut his way into the jungle and found his Zero. They cut the airplane to pieces and hauled it out on their backs.
Diemert restored and sold it. The proceeds helped fund his next project to build a military aircraft for the Canadian Forces. It was called the Defender, an armored plane costing far less than the CF-18s Ottawa was buying at the time. Jerry Susky is a Manitoba aviation buff and a friend of Diemert's.
Very low priced. It was almost like a flying machine gun.
The heavy aircraft struggled to reach the required altitude, and the military, feeling the design was outdated, never took Diemert seriously. So the Defender project never got off the ground.
You're going to stay with this design?
No. We scrapped this design completely. What we need is
But Diemert had another idea, a vessel that skims 6 to 8 meters above the surface of water on an air cushion created by aerodynamic lift. His daughter says he hoped it could defend the Canadian Arctic and ship goods to northern communities.
But unfortunately, he didn't get to see this project to the end.
In 2022, Diemert received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for his accomplishments in aviation. His family and friends hope others find inspiration in his life and his work.
People either admired my dad or thought he was just off his rocker, so to speak. He's crazy. That's never gonna fly. He never stopped dreaming. He still had ideas up till the day he left us.
Bob Diemert died January 11th. He was 85. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And I promise you, kid, that I'll get so much more than I get. I just haven't met you yet.
It's getting harder to remember a time Michael Bublé wasn't a star. For the past 2 decades, the Burnaby, BC crooner has carved out an illustrious career, winning 5 Grammys. But there was a time, back in his mid-20s, when he almost walked away from singing, his childhood dream, after years of being told by record labels he wouldn't sell any records, which is pretty hard to imagine now that he's sold 75 million of them.
It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good.
Michael Bublé talked about the moment everything changed in an interview with the National's Ian Hannah-Mansing. He described a fateful meeting with the president of Warner Records.
I sat down and he said, hi, why should we sign you? We have Sinatra on reprise. And I said, with all due respect, Mr. Wally, he's gone, he's dead. I said, but if you give me a chance, I will work my ass off and I will try to take over. I will try to keep this music alive and, stand on the shoulders of my heroes and make you proud, And 3 or 4 days later they called and said, you are with Warner. And that changed my life forever.
You can watch the full interview with Michael Bublé tonight on The National and also on CBC Gem and CBC News Explore. And since he mentioned Sinatra, we'll leave you with some of Michael Bublé singing one of old Blue Eyes' classics, Come Fly With Me.
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.
Come fly with me, let's fly away. Come fly with me, let's float down to Peru.